It's the IDP show, now you know.
Welcome to the IDP show. I'm your host, Josh Raymer, joined in the virtual Sode Shack tonight by one of our very own. It is Jeff Pomazal, aka Boo Bam. Jeff, how are you, my friend?
Fantastic. I can't believe we're already into week 14. Crazy.
Week 14 is here. It is the last week of the regular season. Fantasy playoffs are on the line, Jeff. And so it is time to buckle down and nail these waiver claims. And that is what we are here to help the good folks do. We had the second coming of the bipocalypse this past week. Thankfully, that's over. But we've got injuries mounting. We've got teams looking to the future. We've got Shaq Leonard signing in Philadelphia. So things are happening, Jeff, as always in the NFL. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to give the folks some waiver targets at DL, linebacker, and DB, along with some players they can look to drop when making these claims. So what do you say we jump into it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start on the defensive line. And let's go to the New York Jets first and talk about Jermaine Johnson. 60% of snaps in week 13, 19 points, rostered in just 26.2% of leagues. Kobe Turner, rookie for the Los Angeles Rams, 52% of snaps in week 13, 16.75 points, rostered in just 12.5% of leagues. And then finally, Marquise Haynes Sr., not junior, senior, Carolina Panthers, 68% of snaps, 18.3 points, rostered in just 6.3% of leagues. So we're stair-stepping down in terms of rostership here. And then honorable mention, we talked about these guys last week, but if they weren't picked up in your leagues, Andrew Van Ginkel is that replacement for Jalen Phillips. We saw an outrageous game from him in week 13, 29.3 points, 5 tackles, an INT for a touchdown, 87% of snaps. He is going to be really solid for you the rest of the way. And then also Samson Ebukam. Now, disclaimer as a Colts fan, this was a extremely profitable matchup against the Tennessee Titans offensive line and a rookie quarterback in Will Levis, but Ebukam did go for 24.2 points on 59% of snaps. So just a couple of targets we mentioned last week, if those guys haven't gotten scooped up yet. From this list, Jeff, who do you want to talk about?
Well, I've been all in on Jermaine Johnson all season long. He was one of my preseason my targets to go after. He hit kind of a lull in the season about week 9, 10, 11. He kind of had like a slow one. So some maybe impatient managers kind of dropped him and he might still be available. He's got an amazing matchup, not only this week, but during the playoffs. And I think that's what some managers need to start looking at is not only this week, but also, hey, who are those week 15, 16 opponents? Definitely for sure get at least a sack or two there. And then he gets Cleveland in week 17. And if Flacco is still a quarterback, he's kind of a statue back there. So he's definitely going to get some great runs. So if you're a manager and Jermaine Johnson is available, he's like my number one priority this week if he's available on the D-line front.
I agree. The matchups are juicy for Jermaine Johnson. He's getting a healthy amount of snaps. We've seen some nice games from him this season, some nice output. So that's the thing, like Jeff mentioned, you want to be looking towards that playoff schedule. We have enough data at this point in the season. It's not like it's week 2 or 3 where it's still relatively fresh. We know what these teams are, who these quarterbacks and offensive lines are. Look at John Macri's points allowed, tackles allowed charts that he puts out on Twitter. If you're looking for good matchups for D-line, linebackers, and safeties, look at the, points allowed, the PFF pass blocking grades for these defensive linemen, right? So there's a lot of data, and that data is pretty well set. So we can trust that looking forward, even if it maybe does change a little bit here over the next few weeks. So that's a great call, Jeff. I have Jermaine Johnson in my main Dynasty League and love having him. He's one of my favorite players I have rostered. I actually want to call out Kobe Turner because he is actually one of the highest scoring rookie IDPs this season. Him and Byron Young both are top 10 IDP rookies this year by Big Three scoring. Again, only rostered in 12.5% of leagues. He was DL number 14 on the week in week 13, multiple sacks in back-to-back weeks, double-digit scoring games in 3 of the last 4. This Rams team is playing well. They're winning. Byron Young and Kobe Turner both get to play alongside Aaron Donald. That's some pretty nice company to have on the defensive line. Byron Young would be my choice if he's out there, but more than likely he is rostered in your league. So look at Kobe Turner potentially if you missed out on getting Byron Young. What do you think about that one, Jeff?
I love the call. And especially in defensive tackle required leagues, I think Turner gets a bump because he's been playing a lot of snaps in the interior. And like you mentioned, too, playing alongside Aaron Donald, he's going to soak up a lot of double and triple teams. And that's going to leave Turner with a lot of one-on-one matchups that he's obviously been very effective at this season. He's right now leading the Rams with most tackles by an interior lineman with 28. He's tied with the team for lead with sacks with Aaron Donald with 7. So like you said, to be a rookie and to be playing this well, he dropped in week 1. It was like, you just put him to the fire and here you go, kid. Good luck.
Yeah, so they didn't have a choice. It was him and Byron Young both. This defense was decimated. This rookie class had to step up for the Rams, and it has. So yeah, I think both those calls, if those guys are out there, those could be priority waiver targets for you. Jeff, let's move to the drop candidates, though, because when you're making waiver claims, most of us have to drop someone in order to make room. So Jason King brought this up a couple weeks ago with defensive line and linebacker. Try to drop a cornerback or safety rather than going tit for tat, D-line for D-line. But if you do have to drop a D-lineman, Jeff, Jordan Davis, Philadelphia Eagles, 53% of snaps in week 13, 6.3 points, rostered in 31% of leagues, but he has no sacks since week 7. He's missed 2 tackles on Sunday, and the snap share hasn't been more than 70% in any game this season. There are better options at defensive tackle, so he's a drop candidate, as well as Cameron Jordan. Big name in IDP, 29% of snaps in week 13, 4.25 points, 2 tackles, rostered in 38% of leagues, no sacks since week 9, playing more than 70% of snaps all season until this past weekend, just not getting it done. 2 double-digit games all year, weeks 1 and 9. You have Carl Granderson opposite him having a monster tackle season. So, Jeff, let's say that you have these waiver options out there on your wire. You've got these guys on your roster, Jordan Davis, Cam Jordan. You dropping either of those guys, make some of these pickups?
I am. I don't think that I think the talent pool is deep enough where you just can't hope on guys anymore. And Cameron Jordan, I think he's more name at this point than he is player. Like you mentioned, Josh, he's got no big sack weeks. He hasn't had a sack since week 9. He's been playing a ton of snaps. So it's not like he's been limited in what he's doing. He just hasn't been getting any stats. And Carl Granderson has been playing like a man possessed. He's been just racking up tackles week in and week out, getting pressures and things like that. So Cam Jordan, he's probably my first one. And then Jordan Davis, I just think he's, again, that whole Philadelphia Eagles defense is just insane on a defensive line unit. And they're just rotating. And it's not so much that he's a bad player. He's just in a very crowded, talented room where he's not going to get the run where he would if he was in a less talented team. And so I just think he's a victim of circumstance in some regards.
Yeah. And we should point out important caveat here. These are redraft drops. These are not dynasty drops. Cameron Jordan's old. You may not feel bad about dropping him in a dynasty league, but someone like Jordan Davis, there could be brighter days ahead. But I think Jalen Carter is probably the defensive tackle you want from the Philadelphia Eagles long term. I don't know what it is you got against guys named Jordan, though, Jeff, putting both Jordan Davis and Cameron Jordan on this list. So maybe some.
And feel free to drop Jordan Cameron too if you still rostering him. So
if he's still hanging out, our RSO league famously, I think, has Brett Favre still in the player pool. So you never know. Some of these league platforms, they don't clean up the bottom of the list when these guys retire. So yeah, if you're still holding on to him as well, cut him loose. I think you can do better. So let's move to linebackers, though. Everyone's favorite position, Jeff. And we got a lot of great candidates because, unfortunately, there were some injuries this past week. And so let's talk through some potential replacements, starting in Tampa Bay with JJ Russell, 98% of snaps, 16.5 points, rostered in 4.9% of leagues. Michael Walker, Pittsburgh Steelers, 96% of snaps, 13.8 points, rostered in 8.3% of leagues. Devin Bush, Seattle Seahawks, 65% of snaps, I think Macri had 92% for Devin Bush after Jordan Brooks went out. 5 points rostered basically, basically nowhere because it was Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks. Devin Bush was getting no run until now. Nefi Sewell, New Orleans Saints, filling in for Pete Warner, 72% of snaps, 13.3 points, rostered in 3.8% of leagues. And then Josh Woods, 98% of snaps, 14.3 points, rostered in 9.9% of leagues. A lot of very stinky but startable names there, Jeff. Who do you want to call out from this list?
Yeah, unfortunately, I just think that's the timing of our season. We've been, and I know that every year we suffered through injuries and things like that, but this year it just seems to be a lot of big names at really inopportune times. And I think the Pittsburgh Steelers have been, I think, hit the hardest, especially at the linebacker position. When doing the weekly waiver wire article, it seems like every week there's a new Cincinnati Bengals secondary player and then a Pittsburgh Steeler linebacker. Landon Roberts was a name, and then he got hurt. Then that gave Mykal Walker a chance to get a little bit of run. So he's going to be my target this week. He played an outstanding amount of snaps. He had 10 tackles. He's graded out very poorly in PFF, which I think, though, is an advantage to managers because offensive coordinators are probably going to target that. Over the last 3 weeks, he's given up 2 receptions in week 11. He gave up 4 receptions in week 12, and then he gave up 6 receptions in week 13. So I think as an offensive coordinator, you're looking at that position is decimated on the Steelers. That might be an area to target, especially, obviously he played Trey McBride this week, so it was just unworldly from the tight end position. But I think that might be an option kind of going forward. Like if I'm an offensive coordinator, I'm going to target their weakest spot, and as an IDP manager, that might be a position to kind of also target. So
yeah, it's sort of like the rookie cornerback rule, right? That this player is going to be seeing a lot of action. These are all sort of like contingency injury replacement type of guys, Jeff, because a lot of these guys are filling in for players who aren't necessarily out for the season. So I think a lot of this is going to depend on what do we see from practice reports this week? What do we see from injury reports? How are these guys trending? I think the
safest guy in this list. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think the one that sticks out the most to me is probably Devin Bush, because Jordan Brooks had a major injury he was coming back from to start the season, made a miraculous recovery, started week 1, has played a healthy snap share all year, despite, my belief he wouldn't be playing till after Halloween. And despite the fact he washed out in Pittsburgh, he is still a name brand, unlike a lot of the guys on this list. So who were you going to say, Jeff, is probably the safest option of this group?
I kind of like Josh Woods, just because with the injury to Kaiser White, he's not going to come back this season. Yeah. They just like Pittsburgh, they can't really sit Walker at this point because they have no one else to turn to. We don't know the extent of Landon Roberts' injury, where if his groin is going to be a 1 week, 2 week thing, if that's going to shut him down. But Josh Woods literally has no one knocking on his door. Again, his grades are about as red as the Arizona Cardinals jerseys are. So again, if you're into that mindset of the offensive coordinators attacking the weakest spot on their team, the Cardinals have a pretty decent secondary. They have a very up and coming defensive line. If I'm an offensive coordinator, I want to attack that middle second tier of their defense. And Josh Woods had 11 tackles this last week against Pittsburgh. So that's, if you're in a tackle heavy league, he's not going to give you the splash plays, but 11 tackles, if you get a pointer or 2 for a tackle and an assist, that's a great week for a waiver wire guy who's available in, a majority of leagues at this point.
The vast majority. And I think this is one of those things where we're just going to have to see who's out there. I can't really rank these guys right now, Jeff, because I don't know the severity of the injuries for the guys that these players are replacing. You mentioned Josh Woods, probably the safest, probably also the least sexy to me. Like I think I'd rather chase like JJ Russell's upside in that Tampa Bay linebacking room, or maybe go after Devin Bush, filling in for Jordan Brooks, who's been very relevant at times this season alongside Bobby Wagner in that Seahawks defense. But again, Jordan Brooks could be back, and then Devin Bush is useless. Now, what is interesting about Tampa Bay's situation is that we have 3 linebackers ahead of JJ Russell who are injured. So you could look at that one of two ways that, if all those guys come back, we'll never see JJ Russell again. He will have a 1 week blip and that will be it. But there's also a chance that Devin White doesn't come back. Levante David doesn't come back. This team is not going to make the playoffs. So do they take their time getting Devin White and Levante David back on the field? If it's Sebastian Dennis manages to come back, it's probably him and JJ Russell with White.
Don't forget KJ Britt.
Yeah, KJ Britt as well. So yeah, I think if you want the safety and security, like Jeff mentioned, Josh Woods is probably the play. And then however you feel about these situations, maybe a good rule of thumb would be look at Macri's charts and see like who has the most primo matchup coming up and then prioritize it that way. But this is one of those situations, folks, you're just going to have to stay on your toes because, again, we need to see what the injury reports and the practice reports look like for these guys coming out of this week of practice. So anything else to add there on the linebacker ads, Jeff?
I know it sounds like, I must have like shares of Josh Woods everywhere, but he does have a bye coming up. So he's going to be very unappealing to a manager. They're not going to want to roster him, but following his week 14 bye during the fantasy playoffs, he gets San Francisco, Chicago, and Philadelphia. So some very solid matchups, and if you're starting 3 or 4, 2 linebackers and 2 flex, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find someone who's going to be a better option for you going forward during the fantasy playoffs. So
there you go. Let's talk about some drop candidates and let's start in Houston. Christian Harris, Denzel Perryman. There's just a really yucky timeshare behind Blake Cashman right now. You could throw Henry To'o in this mix, Corey Littleton, if you're in like a, 60 team league or something insane. So just not a lot of clarity behind Blake Cashman. This week in particular was weird because all 3 guys who played all had 6 tackles. I don't think that's going to happen every week. I still feel confident in Cashman, but I think Christian Harris and Denzel Perryman should be on the chopping block. And then returning to New Orleans, Demario Davis, 100% of snaps, just 4.8 points in week 13, rostered in almost 50% of leagues, but no sacks since week 10, playing 100% of the snaps. It's his 11th season. He is 34 years old. He's just been super inconsistent. He's hard to trust. 6 double-digit weeks, 6 single-digit weeks. So we talk about hot and cold players. Demario Davis literally fits that definition to a T. How do you feel about maybe dropping some of these guys if these other waiver targets are out there, Jeff?
Well, when you mention Houston too, like when you have 3 guys, you don't have anybody. It's kind of that rule. Like you can kind of just sub in, any week. It could be a Christian Harris week. It could be a Denzel Perryman week. Like you mentioned, Henry Tua. And the only guy that you can kind of really trust there is Cashman. And it took him an injury and a suspension to become relevant. So like, how long is his leash too? Is he the future of that position there? And then you throw in Corey Littleton, who is still there too. So it's just kind of a hot mess, like you mentioned. And of them, Cashman is the only guy you can really trust on a consistent basis. Like we said, this is a redraft drop. I would kind of hold on to Christian Harris long term. I think he is, he has the draft capital. He's got that Alabama pedigree. He's long term. I think he's the answer there. Demario Davis, he's had his run. He's done an amazing job as probably one of the most outstanding IDP linebackers. He's probably on the Mount Rushmore of linebackers next to Bobby Wags and stuff like that. But I think it's time to send him out to pasture. And I would have no problem dropping him, especially in these playoffs. You worked hard all season to get to the playoffs. You don't want to have a Denzel Perryman or a Demario Davis cold week of 4 points, make you lose your chance for a championship.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like this week, maybe more than others, because there's no slam dunk, right? There's not a guy taking over for someone who popped an ACL, blew out an Achilles. We know this player is not coming back. I wouldn't mind to hold on to someone like a Demario Davis just because he is getting 100% of snaps. Now he's not been consistent, but he has had boom games. So Mike Woolard put it very well that he has massive FOMO when it comes to dropping linebackers, and I don't disagree. And I am hard pressed to want to drop a guy that's getting 100% of snaps. That said, It's not always the 100% of snap guys that are the ones producing for IDP. So I might hold on to any 100% of snaps linebackers I have this week. Still go out and make your waiver claims, but then see how the injury reports shake out. And if some of these guys we mentioned above are going to be the starters going into week 14, I would probably look to start them over someone like a Demario Davis. Like if a JJ Russell is back out there, if a Devin Bush is back out there, if in Pittsburgh you're looking at Michael Walker being back out there, those are the kind of guys. It's like, am I really going to roll out a Michael Walker? Yeah, we're at that time of the season where you might just have to do that, Jeff.
Yeah, and I think like what you said too, like with JJ Russell, last week when you recorded the show, he was still on the practice squad, and it took, a Devin White, Levante David injury, Savorsay Dennis, and then a KJ Britt like on a Saturday for him to become relevant. So this is the time of year you really have to be aware and following the news and just kind of keeping up to dates, especially if you want to finish out the season strong.
If you want a little cheat code, a little shortcut, make sure you're checking out Banged Up with Lee Andrews every Saturday. He goes through all the relevant injuries for offense and defense. So you're going to hear about all these guys that these linebackers are replacing, what their outlook is from the Friday practice reports. And from there, you should feel confident to maybe make some last minute waiver claims, make your final start sit decisions. And then if you still have questions, pop in on Sunday and talk to Jake and Jeff, and they'll get you straight on those start sit decisions. Jeff, let's move to DB targets. Some interesting names on this list for sure. And let's go back to Los Angeles and talk about John Johnson III. 100% of snaps, 22.4 points in week 13, rostered into 7.5% of leagues. Ambry Thomas, San Francisco 49ers, 92% of snaps, 16.5 points, rostered in just 5.4% of leagues. Houston Texans, Jimmy Ward, 95% of snaps, 16 points in week 13, game-ending interception, rostered in 10.5% of leagues. And then Corey Ballantyne, Green Bay Packers, 100% of snaps, 11.25 points in week 13, rostered in just 3.5% of leagues. So, Jeff, the floor is yours. Who do you want to call out from this list?
I feel like Doc Brown, and we're getting in the DeLorean and we're going in the time machine. We're going to travel back to 2018 when John Johnson was leading the secondary in tackles for IDP. He had 118 tackles that season. It was a second year in Los Angeles as a rookie. It was like this was going to be it. And then kind of the wheels fell off for him, and he kind of staggered around in LA for a couple more seasons. And he went to Cleveland for a couple, and then now he's back in LA, and he hasn't done anything, like literally anything, until after the bye week. And then all of a sudden he started gaining some steam. He played 71% of snaps. Then he played 83% of snaps. Last week it was 100% of snaps. And not only did his snap share start to increase, but his tackle floor started to increase as well. So he's kind of one of those options. Like, we got a lot of depleted secondary pieces as well as linebackers. He's a solid flex option kind of going forward as well, looking at kind of those kind of pieces as well.
Yeah, just remember who was playing safety for the Los Angeles Rams when they won the Super Bowl. It was Eric Weddle, coming out of retirement, playing, a handful of games down the stretch and getting a Super Bowl ring. So this is a move that Sean McVay, the Los Angeles Rams, are accustomed to making. Now, John Johnson, not as old or washed up as Eric Weddle was at that point, but I think there's something to be said for looking at McVay's track record of plugging in veteran DBs late in the season. I think this Rams team really is pushing for a playoff spot. So they're going to keep doing what's working. And right now, having John Johnson back there at the back end of the defense is working. So that's probably my top priority ad for this week, Jeff. Is there anyone you would put above John Johnson at this point from this list?
I really like Jimmy Ward too of Houston. I think DeMarco Ryans really likes a veteran presence out there. That's a really young defense filled with a lot of young players. Obviously they got Will Anderson, they got Stingley Jr. I mean, they're a very young team, and I think they want someone out there with some veteran leadership. And Ward has finally gotten healthy after a hamstring. He's been sat out 3 or 4 games, and now he's out there. He came right back, 6 tackles, the game-ending INT. I just think that that's the kind of player that Ryans wants out there. And I think that he's going to kind of be 100% snap guy going forward as well for them.
Yeah, he was my next guy I wanted to call out there. So I would probably put Don Johnson the third. Let's toss it back to 2018. Put him first on the waiver priority ad, and then Jimmy Ward second. And then if you're in cornerback required leagues, Corey Ballantyne has been a nice option. Johnny's talked about him a lot on the cornerback corner episodes. And then you mentioned Ambry Thomas as well, San Francisco 49ers. He does get Seattle, Arizona, Baltimore the next 3 weeks. He's played more than 80% of snaps in 4 straight games with DBs. Johnny always says 100% of snaps or nothing. I mean, you're just going for volume because this is the position where we have so many options at our disposal. We have most of the time 2 safeties per team, most of the time 3 cornerbacks per team. So you're looking at over 150 options across the NFL with 32 teams. So there's no reason to settle for someone playing, especially less than like 90% of snaps, Jeff.
Yeah, and like you mentioned too earlier, this is the position where you turn your roster over. Instead of dropping a DeMario Davis type player, this is where you drop one of these like secondary players, a corner, and then if they're on the waiver and someone else picks them up, so be it. There's going to be, like you said, 99 other players to choose from that are probably going to be as good as, if not better than, the guy that you just dropped to save your 100% snap linebacker. So.
Yeah, let's talk about some drop candidates. Jonathan Owens, Green Bay Packers, 100% of snaps, just 6.3 points, rostered in 31.8% of leagues. Don't tell Simone Biles that we are putting her husband up for nomination as a drop candidate. Massive few weeks when the team was hit with injuries. Now healthy, the team is going back to the pre-week 7 role that he had. Not great matchups the next 2 weeks versus the Giants and Bucks. We also want to call out Deshaun Elliott, Dolphins, 94% of snaps, 6.3 points in week 13, rostered in 37.8% of leagues, despite playing 80% of snaps or more, just 1 double-digit game since week 3. The game script should allow him to score better, even with Javon Holland out, still unable to fill the stat column. Now, Jeff, we had Jonathan Owens on this list as an ad very recently. I want to say like 1 or 2 weeks ago. Now he's on the drop list. What is going on here?
Well, Kyle B can attest to it too. And I think he even talked about it last week when everyone finally got healthy. Is Owens going to be that guy that goes back to his role? And if you check out his snap count and you check out his stats between weeks 1 and 7, they were literally waiver wire material. He wasn't getting a lot of run. He wasn't playing in a lot of high intensity snap positions. And then all of a sudden the linebackers got decimated. Quay Walker missed games. Devontae Campbell missed games. They had Rudy Ford was injured. Savage was injured. And literally he was the last man standing in that secondary. And for 3 or 4 weeks, he was this year's Jack Sanborn. He was like the guy. And then all of a sudden now we're falling, guys are getting healthy. Quay Walker's back. He had an amazing game last night versus Kansas City. Rudy Ford had a great game. Savage is coming back. And then all of a sudden now we see Owen sliding kind of back to his role that he played previous. So, these are kind of those positions that you kind of have to be in tune to not only the stat sheet, but also what everyone else on the roster is doing and how they're doing and getting healthy. And I just think he's a victim of, he had his good 4-week run, and until injuries pop up again, I think he's going to be kind of relegated to that. He's still playing a ton of snaps, but he only had 5 tackles versus the 11 or 12 that he had on Thanksgiving with that touchdown and stuff like that. So
yeah, you have to
boom or bust.
Yeah, you have to pay attention to with these injury replacement guys, because if the player they're replacing gets healthy and comes back, good chance these guys lose their job. And you may not know about it or hear about it because you're just cruising along. You got yourself a DB 1 or 2, and then all of a sudden the trap door opens and that player drops down in terms of snap count and production. So pay attention to who is getting healthy. Don't get complacent this time of year. Make sure you're tuning in to who is coming back that had previously been out and how it might affect those injury replacements that you have rostered. So Jeff, you do an amazing job for us every week writing the waiver article Monday nights. As far as I know, first to market, theidpshow.com. We give the free subscribers the DL and DB targets and save the linebackers for our paid subscribers. So Jeff, if you people want to check out your work, they can do that over at theidpshow.com. I want to get you out of here on this. all the names we've talked about tonight, who is the one player that you are prioritizing adding this week in your leagues?
I think it has to be Jermaine Johnson. He plays at a premium position, playing on a defense that's just playing lights out. Like if their offense didn't show up, I think they could probably win a few games. I think their offense is like giving up more points than they're getting. And he's just playing phenomenal. Right now in the league, he's 8th in sacks. He's a top 20 guy in sacks with 8. He's a top 25 guy in hurries with 28. He's a top 24 at the position in tackles. So I think he's just an elite ascending player. And if you can get him on your roster, especially in Dynasty, he's going to be a fantastic add, not only this year for a great playoff run, but for many years to come. So
yeah, I remember who that line could be losing next season in New York. It could very well be Jermaine Johnson and this year's first round pick, Will McDonald. So that is the correct answer. Jermaine Johnson is the guy that you should be prioritizing. Defensive line is just so hard to nail down. So if you get a guy like Johnson who is available in a lot of leagues, go check your wire, see if he's out there, and spend some fab on this guy. But thank you, Jeff, again for coming on this episode. Thank you all for tuning in. Like we said, the IDPshow.com. We get the waiver article out to you Monday night. It's out right now. I think it hit the airwaves about 6:30 p.m. Central Time this week. And Jeff's going to continue doing amazing work for us all throughout your fantasy playoffs. So check that out. We will be back next week talking week 15 waivers. The playoffs will be here, and we will be locked in helping you make those waiver claims and those drops to get that lineup ready to win a championship. So for Jeff, this is Josh. We will see you all next week. In the meantime, enjoy the football. Take care.
It's the IDP show. Now you